those of you who follow Major League Baseball, and particularly those who are Met fans, will perhaps remember the beginning of last year's season when the Mets were unstoppable, winning almost every game, becoming the best team in the National League and the second best team in both leagues. And with deference to the Yankee fans, I remind them that the only team that was better than the Mets at the beginning happened to be the Boston Red Sox, but we won't know that. But it didn't last. It wasn't too long before suddenly the Mets went back to being the Mets and started losing almost every game. And even though they had the best pitcher in baseball, they couldn't do anything else right and ended up having a terrible season. I found myself thinking about that as I was reading the scriptures for this weekend's Mass, because in a certain way, they're presenting to us a picture here on a spiritual level rather than a strictly sports level of the same kind of reality, of starting out well and then falling apart. I mean, look at the reading from the book of Joshua. Here, God is reminding them the incredible things that God has done for the Hebrew people, rescuing them from slavery, bringing through all the terrors of the desert, bringing them now into this wonderful land of milk and honey that God promised them for all time. And as we heard today, they started out enjoying it. But it didn't take too long, as one continues reading beyond the section we had today, that they started being overly influenced by the other people of that land, started worshiping their gods, started becoming people who lost their sense of justice, who lost their sense of concern for the poor, and even got to the point, one of the Psalms tells us, of sacrificing their own children to the demon gods of that land. And as the prophets then were to say, because of that, God said, all right, I'm going to leave you to your own devices. And they ended up being conquered, being exiled to Babylon. And the history of the children of Israel, in many ways, as the prophets taught, had continued that. And it's only been, 50 or 60 years ago that finally they were able once again to return to Israel and have their own country. Paul, in his letter, talks about very much the same thing. He says, look at the way in which God has made us, a new creation. Now, he's talking to people who have recently been converted to Christianity, but he's also writing to us who were given that at our baptism, who were liberated from a world of violence, a world of hatred, a world of lies, a world of manipulation, a world of lack of integrity, brought through the death and resurrection of Christ into a new world of peace, of justice, of beauty, of wonder. But in how many ways have you and I let that go? How many ways in which even our church has let that go, as we've begun to see so terribly in recent years? The promise that God makes to us is still there, but we can't allow ourselves to live in that promise because we get caught up in our own weakness, in our own sin. But that's not the entirety of the story. The gospel passage today tells us of one particular person who did that, who had everything in his father's home, gave it up because of his own willfulness, lost it all, but always was welcomed home, just as you and I are always welcomed home. We're given these passages during this time of Lent as an opportunity for us, first of all, honestly to admit to ourselves the way in which we haven't fully opened our hearts to God's promise. Honestly, to be able to look at the ways in which we failed to live this new life, this new creation that God has given us in our baptism. But then also to realize that the possibility of forgiveness, the possibility of starting over, the possibility of allowing the Spirit of God to pick us up and start us off again. We don't think we can do that on our own. The challenge of Lent is not a challenge to say, okay, I'm going to do better now. The challenge of Lent is the challenge for us to open our hearts to the Spirit of God, to say, Lord, I need to be changed. I need to be renewed. I need to continue to be washed in the blood of Christ that was shed for me. And we know that the promise is always there, that God will always take us back, that God will always forgive us, asking only our honest admission of our need still to grow. And as we heard in the second half of tonight's gospel, our willingness to forgive one another. And so we do wear lighter vestments today. We do rejoice, because even though we know we will be celebrating the death of Christ, we will also be celebrating the resurrection and the renewal of our own baptism. And above all, that we are celebrating the love of God, who continues to keep open the promise of new life, the promise of making us a new creation. And even when we flub it, He's still always willing to take us back and start us off again.